Welcome to Unload and Show Clear, the podcast about all things IDPA. And now, here's your host, living proof that without practice, there's no limit to how little you can accomplish, Lloyd Bailey.
Hey, welcome to episode 4 of Unload and Show Clear. We are talking today about actually shooting a stage, but we're going to talk about safety and range commands. We previously covered some basic overviews of, how a match works, divisions and classes. We're going to talk in more detail about what happens between the berms. We're going to focus, though, on safety. So let's first review Colonel Cooper's 4 basic rules of gun safety and how those rules apply to IDPA. The first rule is to treat all guns as if they're always loaded. Now, in the context of IDPA, this means don't go playing with your gun. When you're not shooting, don't take it out, don't play with it, unless you're in a safe area, don't take the gun out of the holster. Treat it as if it is a live gun at all times. Rule number 2, always keep the gun pointed in a generally safe direction. Generally safe is downrange, towards the berm at the back of the bay, towards the berms at the side of the bay, never at your feet, never at yourself.
You'll shoot your eye out, kid.
Never at other people, and never backwards towards the back of the bay where spectators and other shooters are standing. So violating that rule will get you disqualified, and we'll talk a little more about disqualification in a minute. Keep your finger off the trigger. That's rule number 3, until your sights are on target. Essentially, if you're not engaging targets, if you're not firing shots, keep your finger away from the trigger. Park it on the frame of the gun, away from the trigger guard. And rule number 4 is to identify your target and what is beyond it, which really doesn't apply in IDPA. All of your targets are going to be identified when you do your walkthrough, unless, of course, you have some concerns about how things are set up, in which case you should voice those concerns before you start shooting. But 99% of the time, you're not going to have any issues with what your target, your target or what's beyond it. Now, the only time you might have an issue with this is if you're shooting an indoor match. You want to be careful that your targets are not set up in a way that shots are going to impact walls. If that is ever the case, if there's ever an opportunity for targets to be shot that would send rounds into concrete walls on either side of a bay, then point those things out to the safety officers before shooting starts. Okay, so disqualification. Mentioned that a couple of times. There are 2 kinds of DQs, and at some point, everybody is going to fall prey to one or the other, or both. All right, one kind of disqualification is the equipment violation. We talked a little bit about this in a previous episode when we talked about ammo. At some matches, depending on the size of the match, so the tier, if you want to hear more about tiers and divisions and all that good stuff, go back to episode 3. But depending on the size of the match, you may have an equipment check, and that check is to make sure that everybody is playing by the same basic rules. Depending upon your division, your gun is going to have to fit in a box, a different size box, and you'll have a weight limit based on the division as well. So last year, for an example, I started shooting Enhanced Service Pistol, ESP, with my Glock 34. And as part of that, I added a magwell to the gun. As we discussed in episode 3, when we talked about divisions, or in that division, you can do some modifications to your gun. One of those things is to add a magazine well that makes reloading easier. Well, those magazine wells can add to the size of the gun, and my gun wouldn't fit into the box for the ESP division. When I went to the Arkansas State match, I think it was 4 stages into the match, I got disqualified because the magwell would not allow the gun to fit into the box. So be sure to measure your gun before a major match. If you make an external modification that's a legal modification, you want to make sure that it doesn't affect the size of the gun. If the size is close, don't take a chance. If your local club has got one of those IDPA boxes where you can do the measurements beforehand, ask them and see if they can measure the gun for you. That way you're not going to be wasting your match fee and your travel expenses getting kicked out of a major match. I shot some matches with a TriStar P120, which is a CZ75 clone, in the Enhanced Service Pistol Division a few years back, and the weight limit for ESP is 43 ounces with an empty magazine. And when I got to the scale at one match, the gun was just over 42 ounces, and the safety officer's eyes got big, and he kind of grinned at me, and he said, "Whoa, that was close." Another match, I brought ammo with me that had been reloaded, and it was reloaded for my Glock 34, which is a full-size 5-inch barrel gun. And I had chronographed that ammo myself, and it was great. But I took a smaller gun to the match, and that one was just barely larger than a Glock 19, under 5 inches. The barrel is like 4.5 inches, and the velocities with that same ammunition turn out to be different. And I didn't consider that before I got to the match. When you do an equipment check and they do the chrono, they're going to take 3 rounds out of a loaded magazine, and you're going to hand that ammunition over to a safety officer. Actually, generally they take 7 rounds and put it in a baggie with your shooter number on it. And when you get to the chronograph stage, they're going to take that ammunition. They're going to pick at random. They're just going to grab 3 out of the 7 out of the bag. And they're going to take an empty magazine and put those 3 rounds in. They're going to take your gun, and they're going to fire those 3 rounds through the chronograph. And 2 of the 3 rounds have to pass. So I was shooting in the stock service pistol division, so the power factor is 125. That's the weight in grains times the velocity divided by 1,000. So with my 125 grain bullets, I needed 1,000 feet per second to pass. So with the Glock 34, I didn't have any problem. I was getting 1060, 1080, sometimes even 1,100 feet per second. But with the smaller gun, the SO got 998, 1,005, and 1,009. So 2 of those 3 rounds have to pass, and they did. 2 of mine did by less than 10 feet per second. So again, I barely avoided being disqualified. So make sure that before you go to a match that you chrono your ammo and that you chrono the ammo with the gun you plan to shoot. If you loaded that ammo for a different gun, then make sure that it works in the gun that you're going to take if the gun is different. So your gear is also going to be checked to make sure that it is in compliance with the rules, that your holster in the gun and the magazine carriers, the ammunition carriers have to be fully concealed under your cover garment. They have to be positioned at the right places on your belt, and you have to have the right number or no more than the correct number of magazine or ammunition carriers. And they can't be set up like USPSA, where they can be sort of a drop-off set and they can be further away from your body. They have to be designed specifically, or they have to ride in a way that is conducive to concealed carry. So if you fail that test, you're going to be disqualified. Now, the rules about the size and weight of your gun, or the power factor of the ammo, or the gear on your belt, those aren't safety violations, but they give you an unfair competitive advantage. So if you fail, you can still shoot the rest of the match in many cases, but your score just won't count. For example, that match that I shot in Arkansas where I got disqualified, I was able to finish the match, and the sad thing was that I shot really, really well for the last 8 stages, but it didn't count. So the other violations the other disqualification is a safety violation, like dropping your gun, firing a round over the berm, or firing a round into the ground less than 2 yards from your feet, pointing a gun at yourself or someone else, or accidentally discharging the gun while you're reloading, that finger thing, remember? Those violations will get you disqualified immediately, and you will be told to stop what you're doing, unload your gun, holster it, and you're done for the day. A safety violation DQ means that you will not be allowed to continue to compete. So now that we've got the DQs out of the way, let's talk about some of the other range commands that you're going to be hearing and what they mean. The first range command that you're going to hear is when the chief safety officer on the stage will call out, "Range is hot, eyes and ears." And he's going to do this loudly so that everybody can hear it. And the purpose of this is to let everybody know that they need to put on their eye protection and their ear protection because the shooting is getting ready to start. Now, when the shooter comes to the line, the safety officer will ask you if you understand the course of fire. And now this is your chance to ask any questions or any clarifications. This is your last chance. If you do, great, then just say yes. If not, ask your questions immediately. Don't take a whole lot of time with them, though, because that should have been done during your walkthrough. This is only if you just want to make sure you've got it in your head. For example, okay, so it's 2 shots for every target, right? Yes. Okay. Just to clarify, last minute to make sure that you don't forget. Now, once you indicate that you understand the course of fire, you're going to be told to load and make ready. This command is where the safety officer is telling you to load your firearm and prepare it for the stage. Now, if the starting condition of your firearm is unloaded, as described in the stage description, you obviously won't hear this command, but you'll be told at this point to place your firearm in the starting position, whether it might be on a table or in a box or whatever. If you are told to load and make ready, now that means that you will draw your gun out of your holster and you are going to load it. For a semi-auto, you're going to insert the magazine and charge the weapon by racking the slide. For a revolver, you're going to draw the gun out, open the cylinder, and load the chambers. Then you're going to place the gun back into either your holster or into the starting position if the gun is going to start loaded. Again, it could be on a table or in a box or in a drawer, something like that. Or you're going to be reholstering. Okay, you'll never reholster an unloaded gun. I've never seen that happen. Whatever the case, be very careful here and don't get ahead of yourself. Go slow, wait for the safety officer's commands, and be very deliberate, especially when you're reholstering a loaded gun. The next range command you're going to hear is, "Are you ready?" And if you don't respond to this, the SO may ask you again, but he doesn't have to, and he could assume that by not answering, you're ready. So if you're not ready...
If you could have anything in the world right now, what would it be?
More time for thinking.
Step back. Let the safety officer know that you need a second or two to gather yourself or to think things over. And then step back to the starting position to begin. Don't take a ton of time and do this sort of in and out of the starting position. That could garner you a penalty. But if you need a moment because, you had a pain or a bug bites you or you got sweat in your eyes or something like this just before you're getting ready to shoot, whatever the case, or maybe your hearing protection slipped or if you got electronic earmuffs and they turned off, sometimes they turn off automatically after a certain period of time, then put your hand up, step back, adjust whatever it is needs to be adjusted, and then step back so you can begin. Now, if you are ready, then you would indicate either by saying yes or ready or nodding your head.
Are you ready to go crazy?
I'm already hearing voices!
And once you indicate to the safety officer that you are ready, the next command you're going to hear is stand by. Now this means that you should stand still because the next thing is going to be the buzzer and you're going to begin shooting. Don't move before the buzzer goes off because you'll receive a PE, a procedural error penalty for a false start. Stand still, wait for the buzzer, and then go. Now, at some point during the stage, you may hear a warning command. Hopefully not, but if you do, the first time you hear it is going to just be a warning, and you'll need to pay attention because these are warnings about potential safety issues. One of these is finger. Remember the rule about not putting your finger on the trigger until the sights are on target. If you're moving around the stage, running from one point to another, and you have your finger on the trigger, you're going to hear this command, finger. If you're trying to reload and your finger slips down towards the trigger and it makes the safety officer a little uncomfortable about what you're doing, you may hear that again. If you hear it more than once, the second time is going to be a disqualification and you're done. So if you hear the finger warning, that means pay attention, your finger is getting too close to the trigger and you're about to do something unsafe. The other warning you may hear is muzzle. And this means that you're close to pointing your gun in an unsafe direction. And what is unsafe will be pointed out to you during the stage briefing. The basics are toward yourself or toward someone else, toward the back of the bay. You may receive a second muzzle warning, and if you do, you'll be disqualified. So these are, if you're about to do something dangerous, they will warn you once, and then they will not allow you to continue shooting if you do it again. Now, if you do it again, or if something goes wrong, you may hear the word stop. The stop command means you should stop and you should not continue to fire. I don't care if you've come up on an array of targets and you've started shooting one of them. Don't finish. Stop immediately, take your finger off the trigger, and wait for the next command from the safety officer. There may be an issue with the targets. There may be an issue with the prop. They may notice that one of the targets was not repositioned or repasted properly. There may be a weather issue like lightning where play may be suspended, or you may get disqualified because you did something wrong. Whatever the case, make sure you keep that gun pointed in a safe direction and wait for the safety officer's commands. Take your finger off the trigger and wait. Now, when you finish your run, the safety officer will say, if you're finished, unload and show clear, like the name of the podcast. If he called stop before you do finish the stage, he will simply say, unload and show clear. Now, for a semi-auto shooter, you're going to unload and show clear by taking the magazine out of the gun and ejecting the ammo from the chamber and then holding the slide back so that the safety officer can inspect it. When you eject the live round from the gun, please don't do that whole thing where you eject the round up in the air and then try to catch it. You may think it looks cool, but it just introduces an unnecessary, exaggerated movement of the gun that might lead you to muzzling somebody or yourself or dropping the gun. Just eject the round, and the safety officer may try to catch it, or he may point it out on the ground afterwards if he knows where it went. Just hold or lock the slide open and then wait for the safety officer to tell you what to do next. He's going to look in the chamber, and then he'll say slide or slide forward, which means you should drop the slide. And next he will say trigger or pull the trigger, meaning you should drop the hammer or disengage the striker depending on the type of gun you have. And once you do this, make sure when he gives you that command, make sure that you're pointing the gun in a safe direction while you do it. Now, for revolver shooters, unload and show clear is a little bit different, obviously. It simply means open the chamber and eject the spent brass and any unfired cartridges. Leave the cylinder open so that the safety officer can inspect it. Make sure that it's pointing in a safe direction. As you do this, the safety officer will confirm that the gun is unloaded, and he will say cylinder or cylinder closed. At that point, you close the cylinder. And finally, no matter what you're doing, which kind of gun you're shooting, the command will be holster. And this is where you're going to reholster your firearm. Now, once you've reholstered, the safety officer will then call out range is clear, and then everybody can move forward to score and paste and reset the targets. Make sure you follow, I'm going to say this again, make sure you follow all of the safety officer's instructions very carefully and don't get ahead of his commands or her commands, even if you know what to do next. I've seen people make a mistake and accidentally fire a shot. It's rare, but the most dangerous part of the game is actually the reholstering part. So go very slowly. Exaggerate keeping your finger off the trigger. Stick the finger really way away from the trigger as you reholster, and do everything very deliberately, especially if the gun is loaded. There was a classifier match that I shot in North Carolina once where this guy who was He knew all the commands. He'd been through all this before. He was an experienced shooter, and he wasn't waiting for the commands. We talked about the classifier in a previous episode, and there's a lot of shooting and reholstering, and he was just getting ahead of the safety officer because he knew what was coming next. He'd shoot, he'd put the gun away before the safety officer had a chance to tell him what to do. And at one point, I don't know exactly what happened, whether he got his finger on the trigger as he was reholstering or whether there was some of his shirt caught in the holster, but he sent a round down his pants leg. It exploded the cell phone in his pocket, and then the bullet came out the bottom of his pants leg next to his foot. Now, fortunately, the bullet didn't hit him, but the glass and plastic shards had penetrated his leg, and we had to cut his pants leg open to make sure he was not hurt seriously, and luckily he wasn't. His pride was actually hurt worse than anything else, but I've seen this happen. Make sure you go slowly and you take care so that you don't make a mistake like this guy did. All right, that's going to do it for today's show. If you have any questions about anything you heard here, be sure to send us an email at Lloyd, Lloyd, at unloadpodcast.com. Check out the show notes at unloadpodcast.com, where I'll have a list of all of these range commands and links to other resources. And be sure to visit us next time for another edition of Unload and Show Clear.